Welcome to GLOBEWATCH with me, Charles Obune, from the United Nations Conference Center here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Well, it is an economy of roughly 25 million consumers and happens to be one of the most democratic market spaces on the continent. It had a double-digit growth of roughly 14% by 2011, and by last year it was almost in a junk state. Well, we are talking about the Ghanaian economy, which has seen a jigsaw puzzling moment. What kind of therapy has been administered by the new administration to take the economy back to roughly 6% growth in nearly a year of leadership? My guest today on GLOBEWATCH is Ghana's Finance Minister, Nana Ofori Atta. Ghanaian Finance Minister Nana Ofori Atta, welcome to GLOBEWATCH and to Cameroonian television.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's good to be here.
On March 21 in Kigali, Rwanda, 44 African countries signed for the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and your country became the first to start the ratification process. Why are you in a hurry?
Well, we are in a hurry because, as you can realize, the continent has quite a bit of poverty, if you want to say it that way, and we should be doing much better than we are doing. In terms of trade between us, it's only about 12%. It should be much more than that. But I think for us in Ghana, there's a historical premise to this, which you alluded to. Our founding president, who therefore led Ghana to become the first independent country in 1957, also was one of the founding members of the AU, with Nyerere, Kaunda, Kenyatta, Nasser, Tubman, and co. So there's been a history of appreciating where Africa should be and how we should be in a hurry to ensure that we eliminate the type of poverty that we see on the continent. And so our president, Nana Akufo-Addo, was very clear after March 21st in Kigali to move us through cabinet and parliament to ensure that we would create the example as a demonstration effect for our colleague countries to join in a hurry.
So that historical imperative therefore encouraged the Ghanaian parliament to ratify. Just tell us how the ratification process happened in Ghana. Was it a coalition with the government and the opposition bench? Was everybody involved?
Oh, it was very unanimous. It is one of those things that is the DNA of most Ghanaians as to the Black Star shining and the emancipation of the African people. So I don't think there was any question about that. It went through cabinet very easily and went through parliament equally fast. So
tell me, what kind of value addition will this Continental Free Trade Agreement add to the Ghanaian economy in particular?
Well, there are two things. You know, that there's, in my high school, our school hymn had one of those verses which says, subjugate yourself so that you may rule. So in our mind, if we see that anything is going to inure to the benefit of the continent, we are prepared to do whatever sacrifices we need as Ghanaians to make it happen. But clearly for us, we can see an expansion of trade, even in the regional bloc of ECOWAS. We can see the facilitation of the informal market in a way that is not injurious. Because right now, you have most of our women folk and children doing cross-border trade, and they go through a lot of hassles. And this would hopefully eliminate that and ensure that our people are protected in what they do. But more significantly, you begin to create regional value chains, which would really increase industrialization and therefore get more decent jobs for our youth.
You just alluded to the private sector, and yourself, you are coming from there with so many women involved. Is the Ghanaian economy, the state of the Ghanaian economy, ready to absorb the shocks which will come in with the free of the fiscal space?
I'm not sure that there will be any shocks. If there are shocks, it will be positive shocks. I mean, we expect that our trade would increase from about 2.3 billion to maybe $5 billion in that regard. And as you know, our president has been talking about a Ghana beyond aid, which really, in a sense, is saying, how do you create a confident and prosperous society? What we call a wise society, a society that is wealthy, that is inclusive, that is sustainable, and that is empowered. So for us, broadening our capacity to trade with the whole continent, will support that. And I think that moves towards an Africa beyond aid, taking care of our own resources and moving from extractive industries into value addition and being able to eliminate these borders that we have. The African economy is about the size of India. However, we have 107 borders to contend with, and they don't have any. So you can begin to see what the elimination of all of those would do to the facilitation of goods, services, and people.
Mr. Minister, will be ending in less than 5 minutes. I just want to inquire from you, what kind of economic therapy has been administered to the Ghanaian economy? Back in 2011, the economic situation was not the best. Was at 14%, collapsed to about 3.6%, and then by 2017 you are taking it back to 6.7 or close to 7, or getting to double-digit growth. What kind of therapy was administered to come out of that quagmire?
I think really is an issue of hard work and good governance, because you're right. I mean, we came into government in January of 2017 and met quite a bit of headwinds and a pile-up. The budget deficit of 9.3%, inflation was 15.4%, we had a negative primary balance, growth was 3.6%, the lowest, and we had a negative primary balance. So over the period, we were able to move the growth to 8.5% this year. Inflation down to 9.6% from 15.4%. Our foreign exchange position is about 4.5 months cover, and the currency has been pretty stable over that period. And really it was an issue of managing our expenditure better, cutting out corruption as much as we could, and basically sticking to good old values of managing an economy. But at the same time, we did not cut back on social services. Our health insurance scheme is a lot more stable. We started a free senior high school program, which brought 90,000 more people. We eliminated or abolished about 14 taxes, which we thought were inimical to the private sector and the informal sector. So I think we created quite a bit of trust between government and the body politic, and it responded with that type of growth.
Maybe we should be ending. It's true that you have huge challenges in the economy, like the latest report of the World Bank indicated. You are doing pretty well, but you need to balance the books, especially when it comes to the ratio between debt and the gross domestic product, the GDP, with an imbalance of roughly 73%. But the question I want to put to you is, what message do you have to other African countries yet to ratify the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and those who are yet to enter into the entire process? Your next neighbor, the continent's giant economy, is yet to be on board. In North Africa, the giant with roughly 80 million, Egypt, is yet to be on board. The continent's strongest industrial economy, South Africa, is yet to be on board.
I think really it's a question of vision and a clarity of the leadership role that these economists have, and therefore what they should do to look at the greater good that will emanate from that. And my suspicion is that they'll go through their process. I mean, as you mentioned, the Continental Free Trade is essentially saying, how are we going to leverage of these 1.2 billion people with 2.5 trillion GDP to the level that it should be, and to be able to distribute this type of resources for the greater good of our people. There's no question in my mind that if we look at some of the gains that the EU have made, we will also be able to make some gains and learn from the mistakes that they have made. I mean, for us, Ghana, we are quite clear that this is the way to go, because even last week we were able to issue a Eurobond. We went out to get 1.5 billion. There were investors with a team of 8 billion who showed interest in that, and we took 2 billion. So you can see how good economics, a sense of a regional capacity, would lead to potentially crowding in or cascading in private sector resources from outside to support our infrastructure bids. And I think with a continental free trade, it will be quite clear about the economies of scale, which will then enable other private resources to support our growth into the future.
Finally, you are coming from the private sector with a huge background. Let's just separate with this. What kind of relationship should the African private sector economy be entertaining with the government sector today? You have a huge background, especially in the tertiary sector, the banking sector.
Yeah. Now, I think really, I mean, as I sit where I sit now, there really should be a hand-in-glove in relationship, partnership between us and the private sector. Because really, in the end, that is where the jobs are going to be created. And when you look at our demographic dividends, it is the private sector that needs to propel that.
Mostly young people. Mostly
young people, under 24, maybe 60%, of the population. And then when you also look at the role of women, for agriculture, for example, you have, at least in Ghana, about 60% of women participating in that, and about 90% of agro-processing being done by women. So these are the compelling reasons, why the private sector is needed, and how to find a way to formalize the informal market so there's protection and we can increase the resources to them.
The Ghanaian Minister of Finance, Nana Ofori Atta, thank you very much indeed for being guest on our program.
Thank you very much, Charles.
And delegates have been discussing the impact of the continental free trade area for the development of Africa, the continent itself, and then development partners, including the United Nations Development Program. And I am glad to be joined by Mr. Lamin, one of its senior officials in Africa. You are welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
At the level of the United Nations Development Program, when you hear the Continental Free Trade Area for Africa, what does it instill in you?
Before proceeding, let me also say thank you for having me. The signing of this agreement has brought a lot of joy to us, a lot of satisfaction, because it's an issue on which the United Nations system, and UNDP in particular, has been working on for a long time. Of course, the idea is not new. It goes back, as you know, even the pre-colonial days, and people like President Kwame Nkrumah put a lot of emphasis on it. And in the 80s, you will recall that there was the Lagos Plan of Action, followed by the Abuja agreement. So without taking too much time, I think those who understand development will quickly agree that Africa needs to come together as a continent. Our continent is very fragmented. This happened before the colonial times, as you know, and the people have moaned about it. But what is important is for there to be realization that African countries need to come together in order for them to accelerate the transformation of their economies. But not only that, but also to have a stronger voice in the global scene. So for the CFTA itself, it is more or less a culmination of work which started many years ago. The idea is to create a conducive environment, framework, for that integration to take place. So we in the United Nations, we are pleased that the leaders of the continent have taken this important step. And of course, we want to particularly recognize the efforts of President Kagame. We are not saying that he is the only one to whom commendation should be given, but I think he catalyzed this process. He worked very hard towards that.
You said it will give Africa a voice. It is believed that roughly 20% is intra-African trade today. How will the Continental Free Trade Area expand the intra-African trading system?
Okay, very good point. We are talking about transformation. There has been a lot of discussion of Africa's past, this recent growth episode, which started in the late 90s and went through until 2014, 2015, more or less. And then the vulnerability, that was a great achievement, but the vulnerability still of the African economies was revealed by the fact that when the commodity prices started going down again, the steam in that growth was lost. And in fact, that even in 2016, 2017, the average growth rate in Africa went below 2%. It's picking up a little bit. Now it's about 3.6, but we still have a long way to go. Now, why is the integration important and why is the CFTA important? Just think for a moment. In order for Africa to be able to deal with the vulnerabilities of its economies, there has to be a widening of the productive base. And in this case, Africa has to develop the manufacturing sector much more than that exists today. And manufactured goods require bigger markets and what they call economies of scale. And a small country like, say, Gambia, or even a medium-sized country like Cameroon will not be able to realize economies of scale for many industrial products. So that is why it is important that this integration happens. So it will do two great things. First, it will allow most of the countries to start building their manufacturing base, increase the trade among themselves, and then that will also provide a foundation now for them to enter into the more competitive global market.
Is it going to double the trading percentage? Is it going to triple it? Is it going to quadruple it? And if yes, at what space and time?
Well, what I can tell you, and eventually you're going to reach that. Today, as you said, it's even less than 20%. Into Africa trade is less than 20%. So what is important is that there is going to be, if there is determined, sustained effort at integration, what will happen, there will definitely be an upward trajectory in that trend. The increase in inter-Africa trade will definitely take place. Whether it will be quadrupled or, triple or quadrupled, I think that what is important is that there will definitely be an upward trend in that.
I understand that when the founding fathers of the African Union or Organization of African Unity started in 1960, there were two benchmarks on the table. First, obtain the complete political liberation of the continent, which has been achieved because colonization, political colonization is a history, and then economic independence, which had to come through the common market.
Yes.
You were in Yaoundé a few months ago to launch a report on extremism on the continent. That between 2011 and 2017, at least 35,000 Africans died because of violent extremism, most of them young people. How does the Continental Free Trade Area diffuse occurrences like those ones?
Yeah, that is a very important point. I have made the point, remember at the launch, I made the point that Africa has so many challenges, developmental challenges, political challenges, security challenges. The last challenge we need is spread of violent extremism. And African countries, with support from development partners, of course, will have to work very hard to staunch violent extremism. You know very well that you are from Cameroon. Violent extremism cannot be dealt with effectively by only one country. And so that is why you need cooperation arrangements, as it is happening in the Lake Chad area, for the countries to come together to combat this. So we've seen the positive impact of that cooperation. Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, they are coming together and are being supported by also some of the other neighboring countries, like Niger, that may not be directly affected. So that is the starting point. The Continental Free Trade Area, of course, is grounded directly on economic foundations, but the cooperation that it will engender, it will reinforce among the African countries, will allow them to also naturally deal with the phenomena of violent extremism.
Now, I know that the UN system is a well of statistics. Have you tried to figure out the kind of jobs? How many would the Continental Free Trade Area be creating with the opening of space, of reduction of custom barriers? Have you tried to figure out the kind of jobs it will be creating for young African people?
Well, yes, we are interested in statistics because we like to say evidence-based policy making. It's better. It's better to base policies, on precise figures, precise information. Let me sound the warning that you will never get 100% precision, but it helps. Now, talking about the potential impact of the Continental Free Trade Area on job creation, you know very well today that high rates of unemployment, particularly of the youth, unemployment and underemployment constitutes one of the major development challenges. Our statistics show that Africa has created about 6 million jobs over the past growth episode, but we require a minimum of 12 million jobs to be able to absorb, to deal with the unemployment and also absorb the newcomers. So what I want to say is that gives you an idea. It's not only the industrial sector which will benefit from the Continental Free Trade Area that will deal with the job problem, but it will go a long way. It will have to play a critical role in contributing to the creation or closing that gap between what is the job that are required and the job that are actually being created. Can I put a precise figure to it? Probably I can say 1/3 of that has to come from the manufacturing sector.
Okay. Lamin Mane from the United Nations Development Program, thank you very much indeed for accepting to be part of our program today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thank you very much for watching CRTV News, and on behalf of the entire production crew, I'm Charles Obune here in Addis Ababa, and precisely at the United Nations Economic Commission complex. Goodbye from all of us.
Okay.